6 months. That's how long Russian officials themselves say it could take to repair a single refinery, one they've now, in their own governor's words, completely shut down. Not damaged, not disrupted. Completely shut down, with the region's own leader publicly telling residents to prepare for what he called the worst-case scenario. And here's the detail that should actually stop you, because it's not really about drones or explosions at all. According to that same governor, the reason repairs will take so long isn't a shortage of parts on a shelf somewhere in Russia. It's that the damaged equipment was imported in the first place, and Western sanctions are now making it genuinely difficult to replace. I'm Ben Hodges. This week, Ukraine struck the Orsknefteorgsintez refinery in the city of Orsk, in Russia's Orenburg region, and the aftermath of that single strike tells you more about the actual state of Russia's fuel sector than almost anything else we've covered in this entire campaign. But before I walk you through it, I want to correct the framing in this story's own title, the same way I've tried to do with every one of these breakdowns. This wasn't the one giant refinery keeping Putin's war machine fueled. It was one of at least 4 major refineries struck across just 3 days this week. And understanding that broader wave is what actually makes the Orsk story land the way it should. Let me start with the confirmed facts. On the night of August 10th into August 11th, 2026, Ukraine's general staff confirmed its defense forces had struck the Orsknefteorgsintez oil refinery in Orsk, roughly 1,500 kilometers, or about 930 miles from the Ukrainian border. A fire broke out at the facility following the strike, with thick black smoke visible from multiple parts of the city, according to eyewitnesses cited in reporting from the Ukrainian outlet Militarny. Russian authorities imposed a temporary flight restriction, known locally as the Carpet Plan, suspending air traffic within a 100-kilometer radius around Orsk and closing the regional airport entirely while the drone threat was assessed. Preliminary open-source analysis suggested the strike hit either a diesel fuel hydrotreating unit or hydrocracking complex, with at least 2 separate fire hotspots recorded across the facility. Here's what happened 2 days later, and it's the detail that turns this from a routine strike report into something considerably more significant. On Thursday, August 13th, Yevgeny Solntsev, the governor of Russia's Orenburg region, confirmed publicly that the Orsk refinery had completely shut down as a result of the attack. His exact words, posted on Telegram and reported by Reuters, the Moscow Times, and multiple other outlets, were that fragments from the strike had damaged key infrastructure that cannot currently be restored. He specifically attributed the repair difficulty to the fact that some of the refinery's machinery was imported, and that Western sanctions are complicating Russia's ability to source replacement equipment. Repairs, he said, could take up to 6 months. And in a detail that I think captures the real human scale of what's happening here better than any single statistic, Solntsev told residents the region is preparing for what he explicitly called the worst-case scenario, adding that Orenburg would now have to rely on fuel brought in from outside the region entirely, with logistics already being reconfigured to accommodate that shift. Of the 287 gas stations in the region, he said, roughly 80% remain operational, with priority now going to what he described as special-purpose vehicles, a phrase that, in this context, almost certainly means emergency services and, quite possibly, military logistics. Let me tell you what this refinery actually is, because its scale matters for understanding why its complete shutdown is a meaningful blow rather than a minor inconvenience. Orsknefteorgsintez is part of the Safmar industrial group and has an annual crude oil processing capacity, most consistently reported at around 6 to 6.6 million metric tons. It produces gasoline, diesel fuel, aviation fuel, fuel oil, and bitumen, according to Ukraine's general staff and corroborated by Reuters reporting. Ukraine's own military described it as one of the largest oil refineries in the Orenburg region, and an important enterprise within Russia's broader fuel and energy sector. This wasn't this facility's first encounter with Ukrainian strikes either. According to Militarny's reporting, the Orsk refinery had previously been targeted in late April of this year, and before that in October and November of 2025, meaning this week's strike represents at least the 4th confirmed attack on this single facility across roughly 10 months. Joining the same pattern we've documented at Yaroslavl, at Ufa, and at several other refineries throughout this year, repeated strikes against facilities Russia keeps managing to partially repair, until, in this case, the damage finally proved severe enough that partial repair wasn't an option anymore. Now, let me correct the one giant refinery framing properly, because Orsk didn't happen in isolation, and treating it as an isolated event would misrepresent what's actually unfolding across Russia's fuel infrastructure right now. According to the Washington Post's own reporting, published August 13th, the Orsk strike's aftermath emerged as part of what the paper explicitly described as the 4th attack in 3 days in Ukraine's ongoing campaign to choke Moscow's oil sector. Let me walk you through that same 3-day window, because seeing all 4 strikes laid out together is what actually reveals the scale of what Russia's refining sector is absorbing right now in real time this week. On the night of August 9th into August 10th, Ukrainian drones struck the Saratov oil refinery, one of Russia's key fuel infrastructure facilities, according to Ukraine's general staff, with an annual processing capacity of roughly 7 million tons, supplying oil products directly to Russian forces operating in Ukraine. The strike caused what the general staff described as an enormous fire at the facility. That same overnight period, Ukrainian forces also struck the Zapsibneftechim petrochemical complex in Tobolsk, Russia's largest petrochemical facility, more than 2,200 kilometers from the front line, a strike we've covered in detail on this channel separately. The following night, August 10th into August 11th, brought the Nizhnekamsk strike on the Tanaco refinery in Tatarstan, which killed 13 people, including a child, and wounded 75 others, also covered separately on this channel. And the same night saw the Orsk strike we're discussing now. Then on the morning of August 13th, Ukrainian drones struck yet another facility, the Gazprom Neftekhim Salavat oil refinery in Bashkortostan, roughly 1,400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, with Militarny's OSINT analysis confirming the strike, and Bashkortostan Governor Radi Kabirov confirming that debris from one of the drones had fallen in the Salavat industrial zone, sparking a fire. That facility, too, had been struck before in July, when the earlier attack damaged 2 primary refining units with a combined annual capacity of 10 million tons, along with technical overpasses, pipelines, and a production building where high-density polyethylene is manufactured. So that's the real picture behind this week's headlines. Not one giant refinery. 4 major energy facilities struck across roughly 3 days: Saratov, Nizhnekamsk, Orsk, and Salavat, plus a 5th target, the Tobolsk petrochemical complex, landing in that same tight window. Orsk stands out from that group specifically because it's the one where Russian officials themselves have publicly confirmed a complete operational shutdown rather than a fire that got extinguished and repaired within days or weeks, the pattern we've documented at most other facilities throughout this year. Let me give you the broader context for why Orsk's shutdown matters beyond its own regional borders, because the Moscow Times flagged a detail in its reporting that deserves real attention. According to that outlet, Orenburg is now the 16th reported Russian region to face renewed fuel disruptions, following what the paper described as a brief period of stabilization in late July that was subsequently disrupted again by fresh Ukrainian attacks on energy infrastructure. 16 regions. Think about the scale that number actually represents across a country as large as Russia. This isn't a localized problem confined to one southern border town near Kazakhstan. It's the 16th entry on an expanding list of Russian regions, where ordinary residents are now dealing with some version of the fuel shortage, rationing, or supply disruption this campaign has been documented producing since the second half of 2025. There's a detail specific to Orsk's geography worth mentioning too, because of what it says about how deep this campaign now reaches. Orsk sits near Russia's border with Kazakhstan, meaning fuel brought in to cover the shortfall Sontsev described will likely need to travel considerable distances through Russia's own domestic logistics network, or potentially involve cross-border coordination with Kazakhstan itself, adding time and cost to a resupply effort that regional officials are already describing in the language of worst-case contingency planning, rather than routine short-term disruption. I want to walk through the sanctions dimension of this story carefully, because I think it's actually the most strategically significant detail in the entire Orsk episode, more significant in some ways than the shutdown itself. Solntsev's own stated reason for the 6-month repair timeline wasn't a shortage of Russian industrial capacity or a lack of willing repair crews. It was specifically that the damaged equipment relies on imported components, and that the full range of international sanctions currently in place makes replacing that equipment difficult. That's a remarkable admission from a sitting Russian regional governor, made publicly on the record. It tells you that 4.5 years into a war that has supposedly been accompanied by Russia building out domestic industrial substitutes for sanctioned Western technology, at least some of Russia's most critical refining infrastructure still depends on parts and components that Russia cannot easily source or manufacture on its own, even now, even after years of supposed sanctions adaptation. That's not a detail Ukraine invented or exaggerated. It's a Russian official's own explanation for why his region is bracing for a worst-case fuel scenario, and it echoes almost exactly the same pattern we documented previously regarding the Tanaco refinery in Nizhnekamsk, where reporting similarly noted that Ukraine's strikes have specifically damaged specialized, often imported equipment, precisely the category of component sanctions are designed to restrict. Let me address the diplomatic backdrop sitting alongside this same week of strikes, because it adds important context to how both sides are currently positioned. According to Ukrainska Pravda's reporting, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated on August 11th, the same general period as the Orsk strike, that Ukraine had submitted new proposals to the United States side following a briefing from his negotiating team. Separately, The Financial Times reported that U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance had specifically asked Ukraine not to strike non-Russian flagged tankers operating in the Black Sea, a request that, if accurate, suggests Washington is attempting to manage and calibrate exactly how far Ukraine's expanding maritime and infrastructure strike campaign extends, even while broadly supporting Ukraine's overall war effort. And in a detail that captures Moscow's own public posture during this same window, Ukrainska Pravda reported that Vladimir Putin appeared in a naval uniform on August 12th, issuing what was described as fresh threats directed at the West. I mention that detail not because I can independently verify its full context or significance, but because it's a genuinely notable data point about how Russia's own leadership chose to present itself publicly during the exact same days its refining sector was absorbing this four-strike wave, projecting strength and defiance rather than any public acknowledgement of the mounting operational strain we've just walked through in detail. Let me be careful here, the same way I've tried to be throughout every one of these breakdowns, about what remains genuinely uncertain in this specific story. Ukraine's military stated that damage assessments at Orsk were still ongoing as of its initial strike confirmation, and I don't have full independent verification of the precise internal condition of the refinery beyond what Governor Solntsev himself has publicly confirmed. What I can tell you with confidence is that the confirmation of a complete shutdown and the specific 6-month repair estimate come directly from a Russian regional government official speaking on the record, not from Ukrainian sources with an obvious interest in exaggerating the strike's effectiveness. When the extent of damage is being confirmed by the affected side, rather than disputed by it, that's generally a stronger form of verification than we get with most strikes in this campaign, where Russian officials, as I've noted repeatedly across earlier breakdowns, typically decline to confirm specifics at all. Let's bring this together into the actual assessment this evidence supports. Russia's refining sector absorbed 4 major strikes in 3 days this week, at Saratov, at Nizhnekamsk, at Orsk, and at Salavat, on top of a 5th strike against a major petrochemical complex in Tobolsk, landing in that same window. Of those, Orsk stands out specifically because Russia's own regional governor has publicly confirmed a complete operational shutdown, attributed the repair delay directly to Western sanctions on imported equipment, and told his own residents to brace for a worst-case fuel scenario while the region shifts to relying on outside supply. That facility now joins a list of 16 Russian regions that have faced fuel disruptions following this campaign's renewed intensity since late July, a number that tells you this isn't a story confined to any single dramatic headline refinery, but a genuinely nationwide pattern of accumulating strain across Russia's fuel and energy infrastructure. I want to close with the same caution I've tried to bring to every one of these breakdowns, because it's what actually makes this kind of analysis trustworthy, rather than just another dramatic headline dressed up with sourcing. This is not a story about Russia's entire fuel sector collapsing overnight, and I don't think the evidence here supports that broader claim, however tempting the war machine fueled by one giant refinery framing might be as a title. Russia's refining network is large, distributed across a vast territory, and has repeatedly demonstrated, across this entire year-long campaign, a genuine capacity to partially absorb even severe individual strikes without triggering total national collapse. What this week's 4-strike wave, and Orsk's confirmed complete shutdown specifically, actually demonstrates is something narrower, but still genuinely significant. That Russia's repair capacity, its ability to keep pace with Ukraine's sustained strike tempo, is now running up directly against the limits of its own sanctions-constrained industrial base. A regional governor publicly admitting his refinery can't be quickly repaired because the necessary parts are foreign-made and hard to source under current sanctions isn't spin from Kiev. It's an admission from inside the Russian system itself. And it tells you that whatever resilience Russia's fuel sector has shown across the earlier stages of this campaign, that resilience has real documented limits. Limits that a single, well-placed strike against the right equipment in the right facility can apparently still reach, even after 4.5 years of a war Moscow has had every opportunity to prepare for. Stay sharp. Stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.